Desperation filled the air, thick and oppressive as the sounds of battle raged on. Alpha Platoon was surrounded, cut off, and dwindling in numbers. The enemy forces were closing in, and there was no way to call for reinforcements. Sergeant David Novak crouched behind a stack of sandbags, blood dripping down his face from a grazing shot. He looked at his men. 12 out of the original 23 soldiers were still alive. Their situation was dire. "We need to do something," he muttered under his breath. The air was thick with gunfire, the sky cracked with explosions, and the battlefield was a pit of chaos. His voice was rough as he shouted, "Is there anyone here who can handle a rifle?" "Anyone at all?" Silence answered him. The soldiers exchanged worried glances, none daring to speak. Just when it seemed like hope was gone, a figure stood up from the shadows. A woman, quiet and unassuming, someone who had barely spoken since she joined them 4 days ago. She didn't flinch at the sounds of war. She moved with a calmness that unsettled the others. Private Kamila Kowalska. Logistics, but she wasn't just a logistics clerk, not anymore. She reached into her pack with deliberate movements, pulling out a black rifle case. The soldiers, too stunned to speak, watched as she opened it. Inside was a Barrett M82, a weapon that cost more than most cars. "Where did you get that?" someone whispered, but Kamila didn't answer. She just calmly set the weapon up and checked it, as if the battle around her was nothing more than a background noise. In her hands, the rifle looked like an extension of her own body. A long-range sniper rifle capable of turning the tide of battle in an instant. Camilla's quiet demeanor had fooled everyone. She wasn't just a clerk. She was a sniper. A ghost. A weapon waiting to be unleashed. And now, Alpha Platoon had a chance. She was their last hope. Camilla's fingers moved with mechanical precision, each action deliberate and calm. The weight of the rifle was nothing to her. The chaos of battle was irrelevant. Her hands, steady and practiced, ensured the weapon was ready. The scope, perfectly calibrated, could pinpoint a target over 800 meters away. "I can help," she said, her voice soft, almost detached. Sergeant Novak looked at her, confusion etching his face. "I need to know who you are," he demanded. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed on the crosshairs. In her mind, she was already calculating the distance, wind, humidity, and temperature. "Who are you?" Novak asked again, his voice rising in frustration. Kamila exhaled slowly, a subtle shift in her posture as she adjusted the scope. "I was once part of the shadow line," she said, almost as an afterthought. "I used to operate behind enemy lines." Novak's heart sank. Shadow line. A name whispered in the most secretive corners of the military. A division so covert that few knew of its existence. The sniper who had once been the best was now here in the trenches as a logistics clerk. She had been part of a program that took out targets without anyone ever knowing. She was a ghost who disappeared the moment she completed her mission. "You were shadow line," Novak repeated, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Kamila didn't acknowledge the question. Instead, she focused on the target. She was already moving, not wasting time on conversation. Her rifle was her language, and she spoke fluently in the deadly art of precision. She looked through the scope and found her first target, a soldier positioned 800 meters away, crouching behind a tree. Without hesitation, she squeezed the trigger. The sound of the shot cracked through the air, sharp and definitive. The soldier fell before he even knew what hit him. The battlefield around them changed in an instant. The momentum shifted. Alpha Platoon had hope now. And it was Kamila Kowalska, the ghost, who would be the one to see them through. Kamila adjusted her position behind the sandbags, her eyes never leaving the scope. Her breathing was steady, deep, as if the battlefield were nothing more than a calm morning at the range. Each target was calculated, each movement measured. The chaos of war, the screams of dying soldiers, the crackle of gunfire, all of it faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the next shot. "I've eliminated the forward observer," Kamila said, her voice low but firm. "They'll try to reorganize. It's only a matter of time before they pull back, but we need to keep them off balance." Sergeant Novak watched her with a growing sense of awe. She had already taken out 3 targets, a sniper, a machine gunner, and a forward spotter. The enemy forces, once confident and coordinated, were now starting to fracture. "Where are they moving?" he asked, urgency creeping into his voice. Camilla adjusted the scope again, tracking the enemy formations as they regrouped. She noted their position, 500 meters to the right. The soldiers were huddling behind a destroyed vehicle, trying to form a defensive line. But Camilla could see through the smoke and debris, could see the flaws in their position. She whispered to herself, "They're trying to outflank us. I can't let them." Without a moment's hesitation, she lined up her next shot. This time, her target was an officer, directing the retreat. Camilla adjusted for the wind and took the shot. The officer dropped, his command structure crumbling as chaos spread throughout the enemy ranks. The confusion was palpable. The enemy was losing its grip. But Camilla wasn't done yet. She was already scanning for her next target, and with each kill, the odds of survival for Alpha Platoon grew. But for Camilla, this was just another day in the life of a soldier, one shot at a time, one life at a time. A ghost in the smoke. The battlefield was shifting, no longer a series of coordinated assaults, but a chaotic dance of retreat and advance. The enemy was faltering, and Camilla could feel the change in the air. The next target was already in her sights. A mortar crew frantically trying to reposition and load their weapons. Camilla didn't hesitate. The first shot rang out, and the crew member closest to the mortar collapsed. She cycled the bolt with a practiced hand, aimed again, and fired. The second crew member fell, and the mortar was silenced. Camilla didn't even pause to watch the aftermath. She was already focusing on her next target. A soldier attempting to reorganize a machine gun nest. Camilla's eye was steady, her breath controlled. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the soldier crumpled. The enemy was being methodically dismantled, piece by piece, and they were beginning to realize the threat they were facing. Sergeant Novak, watching the scene unfold from behind cover, knew that Camilla was their only chance, but he also knew the cost. "How much longer can you keep this up?" he asked, his voice strained. Camilla didn't look away from her scope. "As long as it takes," she replied coolly, her voice like ice. "But you need to move. You need to retreat while they're distracted." Novak's mind raced. He wanted to trust her, to believe in her skill, but retreating meant leaving her exposed. "And what about you?" he asked, voice tight. Camilla's expression didn't shift. "I'll be fine," she said, almost too calmly. But Novak wasn't sure. He could see the strain in her eyes, the toll of so much precision, so many lives taken, but she didn't flinch. She didn't stop, and for Alpha Platoon, that was the difference between life and death. "Go," Camilla ordered, her voice firm, "before they regroup." With a final glance, Novak nodded and motioned to the platoon. Camilla was already calculating her next move. The game was shifting, but Camilla Kowalska was the one holding all the cards. The retreat had begun, slow and methodical, as Alpha Platoon moved with a kind of desperate efficiency. The sounds of battle had quieted for a moment, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sergeant Novak kept his eyes on the distant battlefield, knowing the enemy would regroup soon. They were only a few hundred meters from safety, but the enemy's counterattack was imminent. Camilla remained in place, crouched behind the makeshift barricade, her rifle still steady in her hands. Her focus didn't waver. The enemy was reorganizing, but they weren't yet ready to mount a full offensive. The lull was brief, but it was all Camilla needed. She took another shot, silencing a soldier attempting to set up a new machine gun nest. The sound of the Barrett echoed across the ridge, sending ripples of confusion through the enemy's ranks. They were starting to panic, to make mistakes. Camilla's steady hands and cool calculations were breaking them down faster than they could adjust. But Novak knew the enemy wasn't finished. The reinforcements they'd been expecting had arrived, and they were bringing everything they had. Camilla had just taken down another target, a mortar team setting up in the distance, when the ground beneath them shook violently. Mortar rounds exploded near their position, sending debris flying. Camilla didn't flinch. She kept her eyes fixed on the scope, her finger tightening around the trigger. She was already calculating the trajectory of the next shot before the first explosion had even finished echoing. Novak, feeling the tension build, had to make a decision. The retreat was almost complete, but they were running out of time. The enemy would be upon them in minutes, and Camilla would be alone, exposed in her position. "Camilla!" Novak shouted through the chaos. "You need to fall back with the platoon." She didn't respond. Her focus never wavered. Camilla, Novak repeated more urgently. Finally, she looked up, her eyes cold and unblinking. "I'll be fine, Dissy," she said, her voice as steady as ever, but Novak could see the weariness behind her gaze. "We're almost there," he said, a final plea. Camilla's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, she returned her gaze to the scope. She didn't need to speak. She knew what was at stake. For Alpha Platoon, this was their final chance. For Camilla, it was just another shot. The last of Alpha Platoon had reached the gully, the sounds of retreat now mingling with the sporadic crackle of gunfire from behind. Novak kept glancing over his shoulder, willing Camilla to follow, but she remained in her position, resolute and silent. The terrain was uneven, littered with debris from explosions, but the platoon was moving faster now. Camilla's sniper fire had bought them the time they needed. As they crept through the gully, the enemy's advance was slowing, disrupted by the strategic damage she had inflicted. But the moment was fleeting. The calm before the storm. Novak pushed forward, glancing back once more. Camilla had not moved an inch. He knew that the moment she opened fire again, she'd be targeted, marked as the primary threat. The weight of it pressed on him, but he couldn't change her mind. Not now. She had made her decision, and it was one she would carry through to the end. As Alpha Platoon crossed the halfway point, Camilla took her next shot. This time, it was a leader, an officer shouting commands from behind a burning vehicle. The officer's head snapped back as the round found its mark. Now the enemy was disorganized, scattered. But Camilla's hands didn't shake. The rifle was an extension of herself, her past and her duty. She calculated again. Another officer. Another target. The system of command was falling apart, and the enemy was losing its structure. The rifle cracked again, and the officer fell. Camilla was methodical, calm, but each shot wore on her. The violence, the destruction, the decisions. They didn't go away after the shot was fired. She felt the weight of each life she took. Her mind cycled through the same routine, calculation, breath, trigger, over and over again. There was no space for anything else. She was locked in, not just on the battlefield, but on the consequences of her actions. And yet, the reality of what was happening settled in. The platoon was retreating successfully. They would make it out. Thanks to her, Alpha Platoon had a fighting chance, but Camilla wasn't sure if she could say the same about herself. The cost was becoming too much to bear. The weight, too heavy to carry. The enemy's retreat was turning into a full collapse. Alpha Platoon had covered nearly 2/3 of the distance back to their extraction point, and for the first time since the assault began, there was a momentary sense of relief. The soldiers' movements became more confident, but the danger wasn't over yet. Camilla's rifle cracked once more, sending another enemy soldier to the ground. But this time, her movements were slower, her breathing more labored. The relentless rhythm of sniper fire had begun to take its toll. As her eyes scanned for the next target, they betrayed a brief moment of uncertainty. Her gaze flickered to the horizon, the smoke from the battle blending with the fading light. Sergeant Novak was now at the head of the retreat, shouting orders, directing his soldiers to keep moving. He was well aware of the precious seconds Camilla was buying them with each shot, but he could also see the toll it was taking on her. He wasn't sure how much longer she could keep this up. "Camilla," he called out, his voice carrying across the trench, "you need to pull back with the rest of us." She didn't respond immediately, her eyes still focused on the scope, tracking another target, a soldier trying to set up a machine gun. One more shot. She squeezed the trigger, and the soldier fell. "Camilla, this is your last chance. Fall back." Novak's voice was more desperate this time, but Camilla remained unflinching. Her posture was stiff, like she was becoming one with the rifle. "I'm not leaving," she replied, her voice cold and unwavering, "not until it's done." Novak felt the weight of her words. He knew what she meant, but it wasn't just the enemy that was closing in now. Camilla was running out of time. As the last of Alpha Platoon reached the extraction point, Novak turned to see Camilla one last time. She was already shifting position, moving further into the shadows, her rifle still steady. There was no hesitation now. She had made her choice. And Novak understood it, even if he couldn't agree with it. He gave one last glance, then motioned to the platoon. "Move out." The retreat was complete. Camilla had bought them their lives, but at what cost? The battlefield had taken so much from her already, and yet she had no intention of stopping. She had made her decision, and now she would live with it. As Alpha Platoon pulled back to the extraction point, Kamila Kowalska remained behind, her silhouette fading into the smoke and dust. The platoon's retreat had been flawless, a testament to her precise marksmanship, but the cost was written in the lines of her face, in the cold, calculating precision of her every movement. Now she was alone on the battlefield, her rifle her only companion. She had cleared the area of soldiers, taking down officers, machine gunners, and mortar teams, dismantling the enemy's infrastructure piece by piece. But as the platoon retreated safely, Kamila had taken on a new mission, one that was hers alone. She was no longer just holding off the enemy. Now she was buying time, time for herself, time for her ghosts to settle, and perhaps time for her to face them. She crouched behind the shattered remains of a building, scanning the horizon through her scope. The air around her was thick with tension. She could feel the enemy closing in, aware now of the sniper who had been taking them down one by one. They knew she was still out there, still a threat. The thought crossed her mind. Would they send everything they had at her now? Or would they pull back, regroup, and try again? Kamila adjusted her scope and settled into the ruins, her breathing steady. The distance didn't matter anymore. She was used to this. She was used to waiting, to watching, to taking that one perfect shot. As the wind shifted, she saw movement in the distance. A soldier, barely visible through the rubble. She didn't hesitate. She lined up her shot, felt the familiar pressure of the trigger, and fired. The soldier crumpled. Kamila was already calculating her next move before the body hit the ground. Her mind raced, processing the battlefield like a living map. She was isolated, alone in a world of her own making. But even in the silence of the moment, she could feel the weight of the past pressing on her. She had left the shadow line, had walked away from a life of killing and death. But now, here she was, back in the fight. She hadn't run away from her past, she had just put it on hold. The question, as always, was, for how long? Kamila's rifle remained steady in her hands, but her thoughts were anything but. The constant hum of gunfire, the explosions in the distance, had become background noise. Her mind, sharp and clear, focused only on the next target. But even then, her thoughts drifted, and the weight of the decision she had made crept in. She'd killed, and with each life she took, she had felt the heavy price she was paying. But she couldn't stop, not now, not when she knew the platoon's survival depended on her. Her eyes shifted to the horizon once again, and there, just beyond the jagged remnants of a ruined building, she spotted movement. An officer, likely regrouping the last of his men, his position exposed. Kamila took a breath, adjusted the windage, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the battlefield, and the officer crumpled. Her heart rate remained steady as she surveyed the battlefield. The platoon was safe. They had made it out, and she had kept her promise. But as she reloaded, the weight of her choices lingered. There was no relief, no catharsis, only an overwhelming silence that threatened to drown her. A movement behind her caught her attention. She tensed, but before she could react, Sergeant Novak's voice cut through the silence. "It's over, Kamila," he called, his tone full of gratitude and concern. Kamila didn't turn, didn't acknowledge his presence. She had no need to. She had done what she had to do. "The platoon's safe. You've done your job." He paused. "But what about you? Kamila, you've been through hell." Kamila's hand hovered over her rifle, but her fingers didn't tighten around it. She felt the weight of the weapon in her hands, a tool that had saved lives, but also a tool that had taken them. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'll be fine." The words were almost robotic, but they held a truth. She didn't know if she would ever be fine again. But for now, she had survived. She had completed her mission. And that, for better or worse, was all that mattered. The extraction was complete, and Alpha Platoon had made it out. But as Kamila made her way back to the rendezvous point, she felt an unfamiliar emptiness settle in. The adrenaline that had carried her through the battle was beginning to fade, replaced by the quiet weight of what she had done. She had saved the platoon, she had taken down enemy after enemy. But in the stillness of the moment, it felt like she had lost something she couldn't quite name. She looked at the M82 Barrett, now hanging loosely at her side. It had been her constant companion throughout the mission, but now it felt like a stranger. In her mind, she replayed the shots, the precision, the cold calculations, and the calm that had followed each kill. But the faces of the men and women she had killed lingered in the shadows of her thoughts. "You were exactly what we needed," Sergeant Novak had said earlier, but Camilla wasn't so sure. Had she really saved them? Or had she just become another tool of war? She had left the shadow line to escape this life, but in the end, it had followed her. Camilla stopped at the edge of the forest, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. But all she saw was the battlefield, the lives lost, the decisions made, and the moments she couldn't take back. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Camilla," Novak called out, his voice more gentle than she had ever heard it. "Are you coming?" She nodded slowly, then turned to face him. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. "I'm coming." And as she walked away from the battlefield, the weight of the past still clung to her. But there was also a sense of resolution, a quiet understanding that she had made the right choice, for better or worse. As long as the weight didn't crush her, she would carry it. For now, it was enough.